So it's 9 o'clock. I don't know. I'm not feeling very beastly because I'm on the East Coast. So it seems like a normal work day. So if you're joining from outside the East Coast, it may feel a little bit more beastly to you. It's interesting. I said this during the Neapolitan that I moderated yesterday, but this topic of textbooks and the relationship between textbooks and the library and those changing roles has been a bubbling question for several years now. And I think we're definitely to the point where in the age of COVID, that issue / trend / question has really jumped to the fore. So I think you've seen evidence of that across the agenda here. Some of that was planned in advance actually to address the trend, but COVID has really been the accelerant. So I'm gonna invite folks to jump in and comment perhaps on things that you're seeing locally on your campus, or use this opportunity to tap into the collective brain of your colleagues and see, if they may have some answers or suggestions about how to frame this within your library and your community. So I'll stop talking. To speak, all you need to do is unmute yourself, and I'll mute myself. Nick. I can't believe everyone's so shy. So yesterday at the Blurred Lines session, which was, we had a representative from the National Association of College Stores, a publisher on the line from Oxford University Press, and then also a scholarly information library from UCLA, Jennifer Chan. I don't know if any of you were able to take a look at that, but there was a pretty spirited discussion at the end about different business models that are coming into the market, specifically OER, open education resources, and then also included access and how those two different types of business models are impacting. Anyone have comments there or questions? Again, you can share your own experience or tap into the collective brain of the group.
Meg, this is Bob Boise. Hi. So representing the publisher again, Springer Nature this time, but I don't really want to talk about that so much as that make sure that people don't, kind of assume that publishers like us are somehow opposed to open education resources. I think it's, kind of quite the opposite. We're excited by it. We talk about it. And we see that it fits a place, especially for those freshman classes, the big classes, the ones where, that usually you trot out the very expensive big textbooks for those classes, the commercial ones. And I see OER kind of cutting into that, which I think is, is important for the students who often don't have the funds to handle the big prices there, and then the kind of textbooks that we offer they fit in at maybe the second, third, fourth year graduate studies, stuff like that, where hopefully if the library has licensed them, they don't cost anything to the students either. So we're trying to carve an affordability path, and I just hope that people can see, complementary efforts, that we're trying to do, and not, antagonistic approach.
And I think that definitely Lisa Noctegal from Oxford University Press on their panel yesterday echoed those statements. And I think it's more about access. I think the business models will change, perhaps need to change, but I think I'm intellectually more interested in the phenomenon that an overwhelming amount of students currently don't, for any number of reasons, the data will say that only 1 in 4 students actually purchases the required textbooks for their class. So, I mean, it doesn't take a rocket scientist to say, well, that's going to go directly to outcomes, right? If these students don't have the materials they need. And I definitely, to go back to you, Robert, I think affordability plays into why that is, but I think there are other reasons as well in terms of pedagogical reasons. Are the faculty actually using these materials effectively? And I also think that there are reasons around why students don't see value potentially.
Yeah, I mean, ebooks in general, you know, have taken a sweet long time to kind of really find their footing, and you know, they're used in certain ways for quick discovery and for excerpting, and they have a lot of value for, you know, being able to find content and all that kind of stuff. But I think that I heard yesterday a kind of a change, a little bit of a change. A librarian from, you know, UBC, British Columbia, Okanagan, was talking about how she's now getting feedback from both students and faculty that, you know, we really do have to make do with these ebooks. We have to come around, we have to use them, and we have to, you know, during the pandemic, we've had to come to terms with them, that they're resources that we have to use now. And yeah, if the access and the business models work, then I think people now realize that they have to really make ebooks a part of their studies.
So some of the people in the chat are talking about inherent antagonistic relationships, and I tend to agree. We ran into some issues this semester with some publishers only allowing hard copies to be produced for their rental fleets. So there is no longer a used book market for that particular resource. And the other thing that we saw was publishers selling an access card that includes a loose leaf book, but the professor has to engage with an online platform and set up a course in the online platform. And then the student has to also sign into the online platform in order to be drop shipped the loose leaf textbook. And those are inherently antagonistic moves.
Because they can't hear me.
Two.
Two.
It's made. It's done.
God bless you. So certainly, I think anyone care to comment? Any similar experience in your community, on your campus?
Well, this is John from Villanova, John Benionis. We did present yesterday on our affordable materials project at 3:30, and that's kind of making more of the distinction between traditional textbooks and more monographic course materials, where I think there is, you know, progress that can be made. Certainly what we're doing, we're able to, actually we have a very good working relationship with our bookstore, first of all, which we're allowed to get the course materials list ahead of time and then match it against either what we have already available through the library or what we can purchase through Gobi for an unlimited seat ebook for some of these more monographic course materials. And this has really worked well for us, where we match about roughly 200 titles per semester now. And you know, the usage is very strong. So there are ways to kind of solve this problem, but it's, again, the distinction between the traditional expensive STEM textbook and some of the more, different types of materials for humanities and more social-oriented courses. Although we do have participation in some of the STEM courses as well for certain types of materials. So it does work for us also. It's that distinction that's kind of the hang for sure.
Yeah, we have run into a couple of cases that a publisher does not sell the ebook to library directly. They only make them available on Whitehall source, which of course does not have a model working with the library. So I don't know if there are any publishers on the call here. I'm curious to hear why is that happening?
I'm sorry, can you just clarify, you're interested in the library purchasing a used book?
Yeah, we have some student request a textbook. So we reach out to the publisher, and the publisher told us they don't sell the book to library directly. They only make the book available on Vital Source. If you know Vital Source, it is
Sure.
a textbook platform working with bookstores. So the problem is Vital Source, they don't, the way how they work is by access code does not work. The libraries has no way to manage access code because that's linked directly to individual students' account. So anyway, so yeah, my question is if there are any publishers on the call, I'm curious to hear why the book's not available to sell to the libraries, but only available Vital Source.
Yeah, I can't. This is Bob again from Springer Nature. I can't really speak to that because our textbook publishing program is almost the opposite. It's almost exclusively to selling to libraries, and we've been well known for, you know, our own issues with business models. We're not, you know, above the issue that sometimes people, you know, question business models. We had been selling in subject packages for a very long time. We're starting to branch off from that to sell in, you know, kind of much smaller amounts. It's still not perfect, but we're down to like 20 books at a time, or $5,600, I think, in an order. Anyway, I guess the point is that we got away from that whole Vital Source thing, but we don't publish those in the Springer Nature program, those, you know, freshman level Psych 101, Biology 101, you know, Stats 101 kind of courses, which are the ones I think we're talking about here. And those publishers will have to speak for themselves, but they really do want to make those individual, you know, those individual sales of those fairly pricey textbooks. People have charted the course of those big publishers. You know, we're associated with Macmillan, so I know a little bit about it. But yeah, it's a different world when you're talking about those freshman textbooks.
Hi, my name is Mike Persick from Haverford College. The publisher that most often fits the description of what Zhao Yan, I believe it was, says is Pearson. So they produce a lot of textbooks and they're never available to buy as ebooks. And you know, that's the kind of thing. If anyone from Pearson is here, we'd love to hear from you. I don't know the names of reps, so I wouldn't know if they were on the list here. I have another issue I want to mention as well, though. So, you know, there's the issue of whether a particular book is available as a library ebook, but there's also the issue of whether the faculty are in any way selecting ebook versions of a book that's available as a library ebook to use in their class. So, for example, I have at least one professor at Haverford that you know, wanted to use such and such an edition of a book, and then it turned out that we could get an ebook version with it was a classical text, so it had like line numbers that could be looked at in almost any edition, and they would all line up with what he was. But he had to have that particular edition with the page numbers and everything, and so we couldn't get an ebook of that. So I'm wondering if other people have a solution. Do you actually produce a list of available books, and then you ask your faculty to select from that rather than just picking a book out of their personal collection and making that the one that's the text?
Hi, Mike. This is John Drucker from Arcadia University. I agree that sometimes it's hard to work with some faculty who are kind of locked into the textbook that they want to use. And it's particularly, it's getting that way also with inclusive access. I've heard from the research, I've heard that the research really supports the notion that faculty really like their access codes, mainly because it's convenient. It has all the materials rolled into it. And they often will failed to consider that that model is not necessarily great for some students. Students don't always get the chance to opt out. So working with faculty is going to be a real challenge for us. I mean, I'm speaking as a faculty librarian. I work with my liaison departments and try to convince them. I mean, they're sick of me saying it, but some of them are starting to listen, that we have to consider affordability and accessibility, and we have to put students first. And if the faculty aren't going to do that, and sometimes we may have to start working at a larger level, whether it's the consortial level or at the departmental level, or basically just form an angry mob of librarians, which nobody wants to see, because that's, well, to really start advocating not just to publishers, but also to our own faculty, who are sometimes come up short in advocating for their own students. And that's thanks, Carrie. I love that. That's my hashtag of the day. But really, we have to draw on our own power as a source of materials for our institutions, that we're able to actually get some of these materials in a more affordable way. And we're not going to be the only ones. We're not going to be the only place where students are going to get it. But we all have to do better, and that's publishers, faculty, and hopefully librarians can be the hub in that.
This is Jodi Brown from Texas State University, and this is not necessarily my experience at Texas State specifically, but just the other institutions I've been at as well, and then actually working with some colleagues in state and out of state on a project which has been slowed since COVID, but I apologize, that's my puppy in the background. Please. So I think the larger issue is that a lot of times faculty don't necessarily have that buy-in. This is in terms of OER, so using OER. And that also ties into tenure and promotion and all of that stuff. But so the colleagues that I've been working with, we sort of come to like unofficial determination in a way that faculty, unless they have some kind of incentive, are not going to push any of these issues. And so it sometimes comes down to getting student buy-in, because students are going to be vocal with their faculty usually. And so that's just my perspective. We can educate faculty all we want. We can, provide all different kinds of options for them, but unless we get students to advocate for themselves and for us, on their behalf, it's probably going to continue down the same vein, unfortunately.
It's interesting. Jennifer mentioned yesterday an initiative at UCLA where the library actually, and she did the work, reached out to the biology and chemistry department and sort of shined a light on this issue and actually collaborated with them. And I'm not going to overstate this because I will misstate it for sure, but you can take a look at what they were able to do. But the faculty was very open to exploring with the library alternative options, and down to the fact, and I will cite this, there's a statement in the faculty position that says the faculty will disclose if they have a financial interest in the textbooks or text materials that they are adopting. So perhaps remiss in that panel yesterday, that was the one voice we didn't have at the table, and perhaps a very important voice, we know a very important voice, the faculty, as part of this equation. But I just typed into the chat, I think, it's sort of like when a researcher will violate copyright, or a faculty member, not necessarily, but a researcher will violate copyright. Many times they don't realize they're violating copyright. And many times the librarian has to point out, hey, you're violating copyright. And then once there's an understanding there, generally you get very good compliance. So I think in many cases with the faculty, this is just not an issue that's been a concern for them in the past. And once they're made aware, they have the knowledge that they need to perhaps make a different decision. And I think that's a role for who better than the library? You all, at least since I've been in the industry 30 years, how much things cost is an issue that librarians are more intimate with than perhaps they'd like to be many times. So.
Hi, this is Susan Thomas from IU South Bend, and we have faculty on our campus who are eager to find materials for their students that don't require textbooks, and so we've been working with them as much as we can. We do encounter cases where they want a book and we can't find it on an ebook platform for multiple users, and so looking at the textbooks publishers, I wondered. It seems like it's almost going to take a movement, kind of like with scholarly publishing, and just really putting pressure on the publishers, maybe to come up with models that are more sustainable, that libraries can participate in, possibly like a subscription service. I know I've heard that a lot of the textbook publishers are so driven by their profit margin that they'll come out with a new edition of a textbook and they've only changed less than 5% of the content. But because of that, it's a new edition, and then that's what they require the students to purchase. So anyway, just my thoughts.
The one thing from our discussion yesterday too, I'm looping back a bit on our comments here this morning. As pedagogy continues to change in many disciplines, sort of outside of the chemistry 101 or accounting 101 sort of meat and potatoes, many courses, the definition between a textbook, a traditional textbook, and the materials that are used in the course, and this was part of the title of the session, are blurring. So you'll see in many curricula as it goes online, the professors are not necessarily using that one big anchor textbook. So those other materials that are around that, perhaps at a publisher like Springer, or Lisa Noctegal mentioned this yesterday, and acknowledge that it is a point of, not contention, but a point of discussion within OUP is what constitutes a textbook and what constitutes a reference book. And those lines, she acknowledged, are blurring, because on the publishing side, the business models attached to those two types of products within the publishing house have always been very discrete and different. Textbooks were for individual purchase, or maybe on reserve shelf in the library, a few copies. And the monographs or the reference books were designed primarily for institutional access and use, and sold, weighted in terms of how they were sold to libraries and perhaps a small group of scholars. So any comment on those two things, that definition? And then perhaps I'm shedding a little bit of light. I'm not a publisher, I should say. I have worked in the past in publishing distribution, but just trying to give a window into how the publishers how and why the publishers kind of get in a panic when they think that a textbook is going to be in the library and they lose an adoption sale, and they're looking at those revenue numbers. So that's kind of a window into perhaps how some of these publishers are viewing this issue.
This is Chris Ferguson at Murray State University, and we are actively, so we probably about 2 years ago, started actively reaching out to faculty and working with our bookstore to identify titles that we can purchase on an unlimited user model. And our bookstore each semester sends us a list of all the course titles that are being adopted, and we parse them through our ebook vendors and figure out which ones we can purchase. And it's faculty, and then contact faculty to say, we've bought this title. So we work with the bookstore to identify them, and then the bookstore provides links in their system to say to students. So we're kind of cutting faculty out of it in some ways. And then after we've purchased the title, we send an email to the faculty to saying this ebook is available. If you want to use it, it's here. And more we have faculty reaching out to us to say, this is really great. Can you provide a textbook for this class? And I say, I can't, because that's a Pearson title, or that's a title from Cengage, or that's from Sage, or that's a publisher that doesn't provide in an unlimited user format. They only sell to end users. They don't provide in a model that works for library acquisitions. And so more and more what faculty are saying to me is, okay, then do you have a different book I can use? And so the argument that I would like to make to textbook publishers is that we're reaching out to faculty, and we're working with our bookstore to actively identify titles that do work for library acquisitions and that will meet faculty and student needs. And that if I understand that they are looking, that there is a risk, that they are worried about losing that textbook revenue, but I have faculty that very much want to be able to reduce that student out-of-pocket cost, and are saying, okay, well, if my textbook and this one that I've identified doesn't work, then let's find a different one. And it doesn't always work, but they're saying, well then, and so I'm absolutely willing to pay more. We are paying for an unlimited user model. We're paying more through the library, but we are meeting a greater need that way. But I think publishers are making a risk here. There is a risk that by saying we're not going to work with libraries, where our goal is the end user, that faculty are realizing then, okay, there are other books out there that might meet my need. There are not, the single textbook from this particular publisher is not the only one that might serve my purpose, and I can find other textbooks. So I think there's a risk that publishers might be running by saying, by essentially blacklisting some of these texts from libraries.
Yeah, Chris, this is Bob again. I've got to agree with you there. I think you make some very good points, and hopefully, you'll raise some awareness with that kind of approach. A lot of people have criticized that, that expensive textbook model, and working with the library and all that. Yeah, I mean, maybe all I can say is that, kind of from my point of view, student affordability of texts is paramount. Spark has made it very clear. The various students, public interest research groups have made it very clear with their research and with their effort. So, it's, I think the time has come to really, kind of make some very big changes. And the movement has clearly started, and I see that libraries are telling me that during the pandemic, they're shifting more of their budget resources over to curriculum-based purchasing, and away perhaps from research-based purchasing a little bit, to meet curriculum needs.
It's so two things. First, I want to respond, Bob, to something you said. It's a dramatic shift, I think, and maybe dramatic isn't the right word, but it is a shift in library thinking. Because for a long time we were like, we don't buy textbooks. That's not what we do. Like, we don't buy textbooks. But I would say that the shift in, because purchasing of a single print textbook was not a valuable use of our funds. Like, it would go on the shelf, and a student would check out that single copy of a print textbook, and then it was gone for the rest of the semester, and it wasn't
Right.
it wasn't a good. And so we actually said, like, that was part of many libraries' collection development policies. We don't buy textbooks. But this shift to electronically available textbooks, or even just electronically available books that can be used as texts for classes, has changed the way that we're building our collections, because now we can support curricula in a way that we weren't able to in a print world. Libraries are changing their collection development policies because we used to not buy texts for classes because one student would check it out and it would be gone. But now we can buy an ebook and serve an entire classroom of 30 to 40 students or more. The other thing I want to respond to is Gabrielle Hernandez she asked a question in the chat. Do you find the majority of the books you purchase without faculty involvement are being used by students? And that's a really great question. I'd have to delve more into our use statistics, but I will say, because of the way we partnered with our bookstore is being really proactive. So twice this semester, twice this fall, a faculty submitted a purchase request for an inclusive access textbook, and the bookstore emailed them and said, I see you submitted a request for an inclusive access textbook. Are you aware the library owns this? And so they emailed the professor and said, we'll still buy this inclusive access if you want, but the library owns this textbook, and we have a link here that we include in our system to make visible to students. And I'm copying Chris Ferguson. So, and then I followed up with the professors. So our bookstore is actively trying to help promote the library resources because they very much, if they can help reduce that student out-of-pocket cost, they want to as well. Now, I will say that is partly because our bookstore is owned and run by Murray State. It's not an independent, like we don't contract out to another bookstore vendor, but they do embed links to like permanent URLs to the library ebooks into their system. So if a student goes into the bookstore's system and searches for a text, they will come up and be like, okay, my book is social work for the 21st century, and it will say this book is available free at the libraries. Now, I do object a tiny bit to the word free because we did pay for it, but it is free to the student. They don't have to pay anything for it. So I've kind of not bickered about how the way that they phrase that.
Not free to the student. They're paying for it.
I'd love to, I think that was Brian. I'd love to have Brian expand on that, but I was just going to ask Chris a follow-on question too. So two things. The logical next step, Chris, and I really admire the work that you've done there. It's an interesting model, and certainly it's taken a lot of thinking differently by folks, which I think is incumbent upon all of us these days. But have you been able to close that loop and go back to your administration and say, we can provide this for the community, but we need to change the way we're funded?
So we are not just yet. Yesterday I was, we haven't gotten to that part yet. We did, so I will say this, when we did a whole lot of purchasing, and I've been trying to track how much we're spending on ebooks over the course of the past 2 to 3 years, but since we really started this initiative. And we're just starting to hit so there was a whole lot when we first started this. There was a huge investment in the first year and a half. Each semester we would encountered a whole lot of books that we had not purchased before. We're starting now, as we're hitting second and third spring terms, to see repeats of books that we already own. So we're now in our, I think our third spring term, and we already own most of the books that are being taught this coming spring. So that investment is, we've already made that investment, and clearly there, some will rotate off and new text will be added. Someone in the talk yesterday proposed, and I can't remember who it was, proposed that inclusive access fees be routed to the library so they could buy more ebooks. And I was like, ooh, that's a fantastic idea. I'd love to see how that might work. So we're just now kind of I really need to kind of dig into the usage stats, but no, we have not closed that loop to kind of say, do you see the impact that this is having on student learning and how we might bring more funding back into the library?
And Brian, did you want to expand? Because I do think that your point is well taken. You know, it's not that there are necessarily less funds in the pipeline. It's where those funds are coming from, or not. So just to clarify for the group, Brian, are you there? Oh,
No,
so
this is just Bob again. But I did hear that kind of tone. I think that is saying, look, the students are paying to go to that school, and at least somewhere, maybe some of that tuition money is you know, going towards the library in some way. So the library's decisions to license content that is then used by them is all, you know, integrated, you know, somewhere in the mix of money. I think I think back to the day that I was at the University of Scranton demonstrating some things to some students, and one student looked me in the eye and said, you know, I pay for this stuff. And I said, you're absolutely right. You pay for this stuff. And so you really want to use it now. That was my message to them.
good point. Well, and I do think maybe that Brian was referring to the fact that in some of these included models, you're actually seeing a line item on your tuition bill. And I have college age students now, and in many institutions that has come to pass, and it was brought up yesterday in our Blurred Lines panel. You know, tuition is already expensive enough, and there are many students that would choose to opt out of that charge, but have in some cases have not been allowed to. So the point is really valid, Brian. I'm glad you brought it up. I don't have an answer, but it is one of the perhaps unintended consequences of that kind of included access model.
This is Sarah. I always point out to my students and faculty that, well, yeah, it is free directly to the students, but they are paying those fees for things that the library purchases and inclusive access and things like that. To me, it falls more into like affordable learning because, you know, there isn't the direct cost, I guess. I don't know. But students, I don't think sometimes realize that they are paying for that through tuition and fees.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. I did not know they were doing line items on now on bills to show those kind of those charges. I'm seeing in the chat that there's talk about possibility of print on demand. And I know there's plenty of students that will tell you that they'd like to have a printed version of whatever texts they're asked to read. So people probably know, if you've bought any Springer ebooks, that we have a My Copy print on demand service, right? So that we took that into you know, kind of our understanding that there were obstacles to people using ebooks, preferences, things like that, and so, you know, I think it's true. You know, if you have a print on demand option as well, if it's low cost enough, you know, you're talking about, you know, photocopy type money, not, you know, big commercial money. Then if you can keep it under $25, something like that, print on demand could work for a student. But if once you get into big numbers again for, you know, for print, you got a problem.
And I will say, just putting back on my bookstore hat here for a moment, the data and the studies show pretty universally that the students' #1 decision-making point trigger when they're looking at purchasing their textbooks, course materials, let's call it these days, it's price. It's hands down, overwhelmingly, they're considering price. So it's not a preference for P over E if both are available. It's not a preference for new over used, rental, any number of the options that students have, which I think are a good thing, by the way. You know, the options that they have now are in the market is a good thing, but it's still price. They will find if they choose to buy something, they're looking for the lowest cost option, which actually, when you say it out loud like that, sort of makes sense.
I'd like to speak for the online students. So for the libraries that have a physical reserve collection, which we do on my physical campus, but if half our student body is online, they don't have access to that. So all those students are at a disadvantage compared to in the on-ground campuses, because although we can provide a copy of the textbook for reserve, the online students don't have that. And the publishers who will not make their textbooks available to libraries on a library ebook platform are disadvantaging those online students who just can't afford the cost of graduate level textbooks.
And then they shouldn't be in college.
Can you say more about what you mean by they shouldn't be in college?
Well, we definitely reach out to students who may not have had the same opportunities as students who go to, I don't know how to put this, but we are highly, we really try to reach out to students who might not otherwise have an opportunity. This is a graduate school only. We are training professional, mostly psychologists, and I would never say that they shouldn't be there. Their work is superb, but just because the textbooks for the graduate students is so difficult that we need to find a way to make it possible for them not only to do their coursework, but obviously their dissertations.
Emily, I fully agree with you. And in fact, at a graduate level, and we have at Arcadia, we have physician assistant, physical therapy, and counseling programs at the graduate level. And that's one area that an inclusive access model, a well-managed inclusive access model, might actually work, where it is rolled into the total cost up front, where the students are going to know this is what the cost is going to be. To the comment that the students should be in college, I have to vehemently disagree with that. I believe that any student that wants to get an education and has done the work to get to the point where they have an education, it's our responsibility as people in academia to make sure that they're able to do that. Libraries can only do so much with the affordable materials, but we have to do what we can, and they should absolutely be there. I welcome all of them.
And I think, John, just to follow on, I appreciate your comments. The success of any academic enterprise is the outcomes for their students. And then the data is pretty clear. You know, if students don't have access to the materials they need to be successful, and just bring it back to some nuts and bolts here, as Emily just said, you know, you have graduate students that are writing their dissertations. You know, you have to put them in a position to be successful. And I think libraries have always done that. So it's just a question of how we address these emerging issues and move forward. So. Other comments or questions? This is, we've got, I'm trying to see, we've covered around 50 folks this morning, which I think is fantastic in terms of participation. But encourage everyone, even if you've been lurking, if you have a comment, question, or even if it's just a comment, please jump in. This is Charleston. Everybody's voice counts.
Is there anybody who's willing to talk about policies that are within your library about interlibrary loaning textbooks from other institutions?
We do that pretty regularly, but we do attempt to purchase the item before we actually make the ILL request.
So you purchase an item that is assigned by an instructor at another institution, and you mean instead of interlibrary loaning it, if possible?
I think I misunderstood your question. If we have
I'm
a student,
sorry, I think I just confused my own self. So if a student, so will you, if you already have the book, but it is out or it is on reserve, will you interlibrary loan additional copies for students from other institutions?
yes.
Okay.
And if we don't already have a copy, we will purchase one to put on reserve.
That's great to hear.
I will say we have a really hard time with getting other libraries to send us a textbook in response to an ILL request. But we also don't get very many requests that we cannot just outright purchase.
Yes, I found that too, that many institutions will not lend what we might consider to be traditional textbooks.
We don't, or we're can't, excuse me, it's morning. We can't request textbooks that are required for course materials, but we will purchase if the library doesn't have it and put it on reserve.
This is Chris at Murray State again. One of the other ways that we have partnered with our bookstore is that for our bookstore will give us a preview copy of a textbook. So for a print copy, so that we don't have to purchase them. So for new textbook adoptions, they will give us a preview copy of a textbook to put on reserve in our libraries. So to help us save on costs, they will, I know, I saw Meg's face, they will give us a copy to put on reserve. So we have a rotating reserve collection that actually belongs to the bookstore. And we put them on reserve, and then as the textbooks fall off and aren't used anymore, we return them to the bookstore and they dispose of them. It's a nice way that they are helping to help support students. In terms of interlibrary loan, because we keep them on reserve, they don't get checked out. If we have a regular book on the shelf that is checked out, we will interlibrary loan another copy from a library to fulfill that student need. Although our preference at this point is to look and see if it's available from one of our ebook providers and then turn on that access. So rather than trying to interlibrary loan it at this point, what we will do is go and look and see if it's available from an ebook provider and then just turn on that access.
So to clarify, the bookstore requests desk copies from the publisher and then does not give them to the library, but lends them to the library as a rotating collection.
Yes, and generally
that's very crafty. I like it.
Isn't it nice? So they request a desk copy from the publisher and then gives it to the library. Well, lends it to the library, and then it stays on our shelves as a reserve copy for students to use. And then when the textbook is no longer being used, we will return it to the bookstore And often what happens, the bookstore will just say to us, well, you can, rather than returning it, you can just dispose of it because it's not being used anymore. Like, we don't need it back.
Cool.
I sometimes think about writing an article about that, but then I don't want publishers to really know what our bookstore is doing.
I don't know. The sleeping bear that is the desk copy mountain, I don't think, no one wants to really talk about that. Number one being publishers. So that is a persistent and ongoing issue in the publishing world, is comp copies and increasingly their impact on the market. So that's a whole nother kettle of fish.
Our faculty are finding that they're getting those desk copies now as ebooks. And it may be because I believe that the desk copy agreement is that they can't be used in the library, that it's to be used by an individual. And I wonder if the move to giving faculty an ebook as a desk copy is to get away from giving away their desk copies or lending their desk copies to the library. We're talking about that on my campus. Because of the cost of books, could the faculty put their desk copies on reserve? And I'm pretty sure that the agreement for the desk copy is that they can't do that. But a publisher could tell me if that's true or not.
Oh, sorry. Yeah, that's true. At least for us. I put in the chat that we're known for not having any DRM on our ebooks, but desk copies for faculty are the one thing where we do have DRM, and it's for the faculty member. But that's for books, and not exclusively to textbooks. It's for books that they're an author on, and it's about cost, and we've just switched to the ebook approach for the person who, for the author.
I will say right now, we don't have any print reserves whatsoever. Due to the pandemic, we eliminated all print reserves.
Well, and I do think the issue of desk copies and what happens to them in the supply chain, it's been an issue for a long time. I think maybe exacerbated by some of the new wrinkles in the supply chain vis-a-vis resellers, and certainly there's a little company out in Seattle that has opened up marketplaces for those kinds of books. But in general, that's not how those things were intended. And faculty, I would then reselling it in the open marketplace, and I think most publishers would as well.
Hi, this is Mike Persick at Haverford again. I see Chuck's comment about having a list of etitles that can be identified and purchased for campus use. Can you just tell us quickly how complicated it was to create that list? That sounds like it would be an onerous task, but I'm very interested. Thank you.
Yeah, I can say that I've certainly myself looked at many university and college websites in my work, and seen some really nice examples of putting up a database of textbook titles in electronic format, specifically for faculty to use, and to be able to search on keyword and stuff like that, and to look for texts that are available through library licensing. And then side by side with that is a database of those titles once they're adopted for a course, just for the students to go in and say, okay, here's the big pool of textbooks that are available electronically. here's the one for my course, my faculty person. And how hard it was, I asked a couple of schools about that. They seemed to be quite committed, and yeah, there was an investment of time, but it was really interesting, and certainly wholeheartedly down the road of, you know, textbook affordability for students.
Thank you both. That's encouraging news. Thanks.
Got about 4 more minutes. Again, if you've been being shy and kept that mute button on, go ahead and jump in. Now is the time. Or you can use the chat as well.
I would just like to reiterate that the textbook publishers who will not make their textbooks available on the library ebook platforms in the end might really lose out, because as we move towards OER, then they're not going to make any money if our students are going to use open resources. And it would be to their advantage to be more cooperative with the libraries to put their books on the library ebook platforms.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you. We've had a few folks drop off to head to the next meeting, but this has been terrific. And I think certainly enlightening for me, rolling through this meeting with this theme of how to best ensure student success, right? What's the library role? What's the publisher role? What is the role of vendors? And how can we evolve this in a way that is positive for the entire enterprise? So thanks so much for contributing. It was recorded, so it will be available online if you'd like to refer back. And you know, Charleston can't succeed without each one of you and your input and thoughts. So we're grateful for that, and have a wonderful day.